Hello everyone, it's Kyle Warsinski, and I'm going to be doing my Week 3 presentation on one of the authors from the Week 3 readings for MPA 510. I've titled this presentation A City as a Bureaucracy. The author I'm going to be focusing on is Robert K. Merton, and his article within the Classics book was titled Bureaucratic Structure and Personality. And what Merton does is he builds on Max Weber's bureaucratic structure and efficient, what he felt was the most ideal organization for efficiency, and how it relates to the people's personalities and how they function within those bureaucratic organizations. So he has really three main concepts, maybe four concepts within the article that he writes. And the first one Merton goes into is this concept called bureaucratic secrecy, and that is when city officials or government officials avoid discussing techniques of their duties, how they actually perform these duties. They keep them secret, and they keep them secret so that they don't divulge their valuable techniques to competitors, or as Merton calls it, hostile political groups. I'll get into that a little bit later in my presentation. The second concept is the unwavering adherence to rules within a bureaucratic organization, because we know how Weber structured the organization. There's written rules, you follow them strictly, there's no wavering. So if you really follow that to the letter of the law, you're going to be focusing on just the rule itself. And what you're doing is you're changing the concept of a means to an ends to an ends in itself. And that would be that the goal is for its own sake. Therefore, the rule is really just there because it's the rule. It may not actually fit the circumstance that you're looking at applying. So that's why I have the end on there, because it turns it into an end in itself versus the means to the end. And when officials focus on that thought process, you have this effective code that you strictly follow, and then you have the strict following of those rules create absolutes, and then the absolutes do not allow for deviation or application of unique circumstances. So therefore, the rules that were intended to be efficient manner of government turn into inefficiency because you're unable to adapt to the special conditions that present themselves as we move forward on a day-to-day process. So he calls that red tape, and we have all heard that bureaucratic red tape. In fact, one of the core values at the city I worked for was eliminating bureaucratic red tape. It was that clear. And Merton goes into that because the adherence to those creates that red tape. And then lastly was this concept that Merton talked about, where you have this inverted relationship between the public and the public officials, in which the public officials, we work for the city council, or work for the city manager, the chairman or the CEO, and then they work for the board, and the board is elected by the public. So technically the public's at the top of your organizational hierarchy or structure, and the public understands that. But in some scenarios, city officials need to be the superior in a situation in which we're telling them they can't do something, or we're enforcing a rule or a law. Happens with typically code enforcement or building and safety or law enforcement personnel, in which we have to implement the laws that are provided as administrators, and we're enforcing those. And Merton goes into this discussion on conflicts with the public, because some officials may take this domineering attitude into these conversations, and that creates the conflict in which the public is now the subordinate of the official, which they helped put into place. So the key on that is to be very mindful when you're engaging in these types of discussions with the public, to not come across like this gentleman I put on the slide. You have to tell them what the rules are, and you may have to enforce, but by no means do you need to come in there with I'm a better than you attitude, or basically talk down to them. You have to kind of get yourself at that level and be able to explain something calmly and efficiently so that they understand why, for the betterment of the community, you are enforcing these rules. So one of the strengths is it builds on Weber's theory of an efficient bureaucratic organization. And another strength of his writings is Merton successfully identifies deficiencies in the bureaucratic structure if they're followed with certain personalities in mind. Some of the weaknesses that I found within the writing is that first concept I talked about, bureaucratic secrecy. That doesn't work anymore. It may have worked back then, but we can't be doing that at City Hall now or within any government organization. The public expects transparency, and for the matter of fact, us as city officials want to push transparency, because the more information we put out there, the more the public turns around and trusts us as honest officials. And then the other weakness that I identified was that Merton talks about these deficiencies, but he really doesn't provide concrete examples on how to solve them. So you kind of have to read through and come up with different scenarios in which how you could better the situation. So my case example for this is the bureaucratic red tape, and I dealt with this personally, and any shopping center deals with this. You have shopping and you have a parking code in which for every square foot of of retail or commercial space you need X amount of parking spots. And planners will get themselves stuck on these parking standards probably for the rest of time. But you can look at it two ways. You can either create a shopping center that has all the parking per the code, and you'll typically never see a parking lot full if they're done that way, unless it's Black Friday. That's the only day parking lots are full in commercial centers. The other way you can look at it is you take the parking code for guidance, and you come to a common sense with who's going in that shopping center, because they don't want parking that's not enough. They just want enough parking so that their customers can come there and easily park and shop, but they don't want 50 or 100 extra stalls that no one's using. That's just a waste of space and can be done away with, and basically additional buildings can be built there, generate more revenue for the owner of the property as well as the city. So my example is, if you were to just follow the bureaucratic structure of this is the rules, we'd have these vast parking lots. But if you're able to take that application, find unique circumstances, like a theater I worked on, which the code said it needed to be a certain amount of spots per seats, and you simply go to city council and say, this may have made sense before, but it doesn't make sense anymore. They're telling us they probably need this amount of parking spots. That seems reasonable. We will monitor the situation moving forward. Let's create a variance in the rules and treat this on a case-by-case basis versus strict adherence to the law. So that's my case example for this week. Here are my references for this week's presentation. There's Merton from the Classics book, as well as Max Weber from the Classics book as well. Thank you so much for watching my video. I know it went a little bit long, but I look forward to watching all of yours as well. Thank you so much. Bye.